I'm smiling because it's Father's Day tomorrow, and I want to wish you all a happy Father's Day for those of you who are fathers. And actually, my son always tells me Father's Day is every day, and it should be celebrated every day, just like Mother's Day should be every day. But unfortunately, in some households, it's not. I'm very fortunate in my house it is. Today, I have them back. Amy, welcome back. Amy Fowler and Dan Williams.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank
And
you,
I
Barry.
want them to come back because a lot of things have been going on since they were last here, and there was this marijuana convention that they attended. There's some major issues, and I call it marijuana convention. It sounds like they went to Hash Bash, but they didn't. It was a convention to deal with the legal issues related to marijuana, and I want to hear about it. Let's start with Amy.
Oh, thank you, Barry. Dan and I took the risk of seeing an ad in the Metro Times, and it was the 420 edition. And
Check this out. Check this out. Metro Times.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
Metro Times.
Where all lawyers need to go to get the beat on what's happening. And there was a full page ad for CannaCon, which is the industry, the canna industry's go-to place to meet other professionals that are involved in the industry. We did a skosh of research on it one afternoon, called them and said, we want a sponsorship. We want to do this. And the rest is kind of history. We spent a lot of May getting our marketing materials together, getting bags together, and getting ourselves together to present our firm and all of the things that we can do in this industry for professionals who are involved in the industry, other attorneys, as well as potential clients who are out there looking for representation. And the beautiful thing about our CannaCon experience, if I can speak for Dan and I, is there is a very wide base of individuals that are interested in this particular industry, but there is a lot of knowledge that is misplaced, a lot of misinformation, a lot of urban rumors out there about it that we have had to dispel in our private meetings that we've had with potential clients that we've yielded from CannaCon. So we're still kind of in the wild, wild west doing this and educating people, and education is key.
Well, it's interesting that you attended this conference because of all the misnomers and lack of factual information. Last week, one of my friends was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer.
Oh,
And he was having
sorry.
trouble. Well, he's dealing with it. He's having radiation treatment. He was having trouble eating and sleeping. So he ended up with a green card.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, the oncologist gave him a green card and told him to get the oils from marijuana, help him eat better and sleep better. So there are benefits.
Absolutely.
Dan, go
And
on.
one of the things that we were, I won't say surprised by, but it was pleasant to see the conference was not what you would expect. It was not filled with long-haired, strange-looking people. These were business industry professionals who are looking to legitimately do business in an industry that can benefit people. We had speakers from Andy Brisboe, who's the head of the Bureau of Marijuana Regulation in the state of Michigan, came and talked about how the licensing process is going and gave us a few hints about what we can look forward to if recreational marijuana passes on the ballot initiative in November. And we had Dana Nessel, who's a candidate for Attorney General, come and speak to us about some of her thoughts in terms of whether her office, if she were elected, would be enforcing marijuana laws or whether they would be friendly to the industry.
Well, recently the state of Michigan, or someone in the state of Michigan, granted a license for a big grow facility in Lansing. Was that a political plum that someone ended up with?
So there's two ways to look at it, I think, Barry. Some people believe that the fix is in, so to speak, that there are certain preferred people who are going to get licenses and that you're wasting your time applying. From our experience in dealing with people who are in the industry, we know folks who are on the board, we know folks who are at the administration in Lara. I would say that's not true. What I would say is, based on what we're seeing, people who have business backgrounds, who don't have issues in their past, can show 3 years of clean bank records, not huge cash deposits that you can't explain away. The board's going to get those through quicker because they have less issues that they have to screen
Okay,
out.
let's break this down. You're saying that people who are financially stable, who have been working, or who have owned businesses that are showing a positive cash flow, who have no criminal records, who want to go into this industry, stand a better chance of getting a license than someone coming off the street who does not have a track record, who does not have a job, but has a stash of cash. Let's make it
Correct.
simple.
Yes, I would say that's very true. Not to say
Absolutely.
that the person off the street in that situation couldn't get one, but you're going to have more explaining to do and more work in terms of convincing the board that they should give you a license.
Well, here's the problem that I perceive.
Sure.
Each community regulates the number of licenses that exist for growing, for distribution, for testing. I mean, there are categories. We'll explain to our audience. And call in if you got questions about this, because it's a really important issue, because
Oh,
it's
yeah.
going on the ballot now. And the reason it's going on the ballot is that the legislators were afraid to pass the legislation for fear that they might lose their seats in the House and the Senate. Consequently, they're leaving it up to the voters, and more likely than not, it's going to pass because there's big money behind it. John Boehner's behind it.
Oh, yeah.
Correct.
John Boehner is the political spokesman for the drug industry, and the drug industry is manufacturing, I should say, they are manufacturing the seeds for the grow facilities. I will not mention the names of the drug companies on the air, but there's some huge global drug companies manufacturing the seeds with the initials of EL.
Yeah.
But my point is, the local, like, let's take Pontiac, for example. Let's say they have 10 licenses for marketing, retailing facilities, all medical marijuana. Aren't those licenses going to go to the people that the city on the city council likes? I mean, let's look at this in the real world. How do you get in line to get a license?
Well, the first thing you have to do is have a properly zoned building, and sometimes getting the piece of real estate is the hardest part. But to suggest that having a connection with the city doesn't help you, I think would be silly. So I think people that have been looking, that do know folks, you probably do stand a little bit better chance from the municipal side of things. But at the same time, the cities do at least have to try to give an open process and allow everybody to apply. They do have procedures by which they have to select applicants, determine whether or not those applicants meet their qualifications. Some of them simply have a first come, first serve. So, for example, Inkster, right? If you were first come, first in the line that day and you got one of the 3 licenses, that was it. People can dispute where they were in the line, whether they were in front and they got passed over by somebody and shouldn't have. That's going to happen, and that's for the lawyers to try to figure out if they have to. But some cities will say we're going to have a deadline. So Kalamazoo, for example, they have an unlimited number of licenses that they're willing to grant, but you can only apply between June 7th and June 28th. After that, forever hold your peace. So they'll get a pile of applications, but if you apply after that, you're out. So each municipality is going to try to do it differently in terms of regulating how many facilities are actually going to be in their locations.
Amy, why'd you get in this business? You see, I had to throw you a curve.
Yes, well, How many times in one's law career can you be at the very beginning of a new burgeoning industry and with the laws that apply to that industry? How many opportunities, Barry, do we get in our law careers to actually take something like this on, own it, watch it progress, watch the ripple effect of it, and be so excited every day to go in, look at the licensing and regulatory agency's website, what is going on in the House up in Lansing, what is going on federally right now, because we've had a lot of movement in the last 2 weeks federally in this arena. And ultimately, what is this going to mean for Michigan? How is it going to differ from other states such as, and jurisdictions such as Colorado and California, Washington, Oregon, Massachusetts? July 1st is coming online with this. What are the ripple effects of this nationwide? It's fascinating, it's phenomenal, and it's ever changing. That's the beautiful thing. And as the three of us and anyone who practices law knows, the law is based on a common law precedent. There isn't a lot of precedent here, and it's ever changing, and the engineering aspects of this are just phenomenally exciting to watch.
Well, the answer to your question, how many times? 3 times in 50 years have I been a participant on the ground floor of changes in the law.
Yes.
But I appreciate the fact that it's exciting. I understand the dynamics of it. My biggest question is, how do we control the use of it? This is a big problem that we're going to have to deal with, because as we talked about last time you were here, and that was May the 5th, if I remember, or I was advised, there's a problem. There's no difference between driving under the influence of alcohol, driving under the influence of drugs, and driving under the influence of marijuana if you have a medical marijuana card. That's not going to be a defense if you injure yourself or injure someone else in an accident.
Correct.
So how are we going to control this? And at what level do we control it? Let me just give you a little example.
Sure.
I go to the liquor store. I'm drunk. And the owner of the liquor store sells me a 12-pack of beer and a bottle of bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
See, I can't do any branding here. Okay. So I'm already completely intoxicated. And he says, "Sir, can I help you out to the car?" He helps me out to the car. I get behind the wheel. I'm drunk. And I start to drive, pull out of the lot, and I cause an accident when I get to the intersection. The owner of the party store is going to be responsible if I started drinking when I went out the door, because he has contributed to my intoxication.
Correct.
If he sold me the first 12-pack of beer and the first bottle of liquor, and I came back to visit him later that day, and I was already totally intoxicated, and he knew who I was, he's really going to get nailed in a lawsuit.
Correct.
So now I go over to your retail facility. I bring in my medical marijuana card. I have a medical ailment. I'm being treated for it. I leave there with some oils, and I take those oils and I start ingesting them in the car,
Mm-hmm.
and I get in an accident.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to get sued because you have a clinic?
So there's
I'm just opening a whole new
Sure.
world to everybody.
so there's two things that we have to look at. First, each of these places is going to be required by the state to have insurance. So
What do you mean insurance? What kind of insurance are
they
you
have to
talking
have
about?
general liability insurance.
What does that mean? Tell our audiences. Come on, audiences, call in here because you're going to learn something real good. Somebody goes to a legitimate dope dealer a marijuana place, and now they have to carry insurance. So if somebody fouls up, you can sue them. Let's hear about it.
So you have to have general facility coverage. So much like a liquor store or a bar has general liability coverage.
Well, but
So-
they have special laws for them called dram shop
Right.
laws. Are they
So-
going to have medical marijuana laws?
Well, that's one of the interesting forefronts that we haven't.
I saw your eyebrows go
gotten
up
to
there
yet.
for a
Yeah.
second, partner.
Because one of the things the legislature is going to have to do, and I don't know if they're waiting for recreational to pass or if they're waiting for the federal government to make some decisions, but ultimately, if we're going to sell a recreational product that can inhibit people's ability to drive a car, at some point we're going to have marijuana dram shop insurance. Now, that's one of the things we've got to figure out both on the legal side and on the business side. So maybe somebody's going to have to sue a dispensary, get into court, and figure out what the liabilities are, because the insurance companies are going to look and say, hey, can we make money on this or not? Is this something we want to get into? And if there's money to be made, the insurance companies will be there. But until we get a precedent set about liability, we won't know.
Now, I'm going to stop here for a second. You threw in the term medical.
Hmm.
When you throw in the term medical, do you come under specific medical statutes in the state of Michigan, like pharmacies come under, and doctors come under, and emergency medical facilities come under? Are you required to go through the procedures that you would have to go through to sue a doctor? Is there a statute of limitations? Now, I'm throwing all these things out because they're really important issues that haven't been dealt with.
Correct.
And as Amy pointed out, she's at, as we call it, ground level, learning, just like I'm asking questions and I'm learning. And these are tough questions to answer. Is this covered under the Michigan professional liability statute?
And that's a loaded question too, because before I was with Amy and we had our own firm, I worked at a different firm, and we didn't do a lot of medical malpractice work, but we would touch on it from time to time. And in working there and in reviewing some of the case law, it's very clear that as time has gone by, the courts in Michigan have been more and more willing to extend what is medical malpractice so that the statutes of limitations on certain types of suits are limited, because with medical malpractice you have less time to sue than you would in normal negligence cases, and there are liability caps built into the statute so that you can only pay out certain amounts of money as a maximum unless you meet a very high threshold. So, without trying to become too engrossed in the details of it, the answer is I don't know.
Okay.
We're going to have to wait and see. The reason I referred to medical is because right now the only legal way to get marijuana in Michigan is if you have a written card. You have a medical marijuana
You need a
card
prescription.
from a doctor.
Yes.
Right, so that starts the whole process right there. That's why I said, are we going to be dealing with the medical laws as they relate to malpractice and liability? Amy, what do you think about that?
I think we will, ultimately. Now you have to have the card, as you referred to, Barry. You have to have a legitimate doctor's signature. You have to be registered with the licensing and regulatory agency who issues your medical marijuana card. You then have to go into a provisionary center, and Lara changed the terms from dispensary to provisioning center on Monday. That is now what they are referred to. And you or your caretaker, in some cases, people are so disabled that their caretaker goes in to get their selection of medicine within the provisionary center. It's ever evolving.
Okay,
And we haven't had a situation where, unfortunately, there's been a parade of horribles, where there's been a crash
that we know about.
that we know about that is involving great bodily harm or massive civil liability of some sort, or God forbid, death. And
Well, let me put it to you this way. Dan's my doctor. Dan writes me a prescription for medicine that causes amnesia. So it makes me go to sleep.
Sure.
Out there, if you're listening, please pay attention because this is very important to you. It could happen to any one of us. So I get in the car. I buy a bottle of pop. A lot of people do this. I take my medicine. I'd taken some medicine before. Earlier in the day, I don't know the effect of how all these medicines interact with each other. The pharmacist doesn't tell me, don't drive when you take this medicine. You must take it when you're at home. So I travel about 3/4 of a mile and I blow a red light and I kill somebody. Okay? I know that I can sue the driver of the car, and I know that I have a fair shot at the pharmacy because of the dispensary if they did not give the person the literature and give them all the rules.
Sure.
Okay, if they gave them all the rules and they gave them the literature and they signed for it and they didn't read it, that's not the drugstore's fault.
Correct.
So next door, you're operating they call it provisional?
Provisioning center.
A provisioning center. Sounds like the Old West. I'm going to go get my provisions and get my mule and go out mining, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, okay. So I better come down there with my mess kit. Setting all that aside, here's the deal. So now I'm over at your place. I come in there. You don't know how much I've ingested during the day, whether I've been eating cookies, having brownies, because I went to the bakery with my card, which I can do.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if there's any control on how much I can receive. There's a big issue, see. There's no control when you go to the liquor store how much you can receive, except they can tell you we're not going to sell it to you. There is control at the pharmacy because you have to sign for the medication,
Correct.
and it goes into a national registry.
Correct.
But for medical marijuana, I don't know the rules. Is there a national registry?
There is a state registry.
Okay.
Correct.
And so you are only allowed to purchase up to 2.5 ounces of usable marijuana or its equivalent. And they have a chart in the rules about what the equivalents are per ounce per day. And so let's say I go into Barry's Provisioning Center. I buy my 2.5 ounces. I can't then go to Amy's Provisioning Center down the road and say I want my 2.5 ounces because they're going to run my card and it's going to show
Correct.
how much I bought and where I bought it. And she's going to say, tough luck, you bought your day's supply, get out of here. Now, as far as the driving question goes, all of the marijuana that is sold at provisioning centers will be required to contain warnings. One is a warning that the product contains THC, which is kind of a no duh, right? You're going to buy marijuana for the reason that it contains THC. That's the medicine portion of what you're buying. But the law also says you're not supposed to drive. And the courts have in the past given us some clarification. So the case, I believe it was People versus Fiesel, indicated that you could drive a car if you had metabolites in your system, but if you had active THC of any level, you violated the operating while intoxicated law.
Okay. You got to stop for a minute because I don't understand the word metabolites.
So
Actually, I do, but I
Right.
want the audience to understand.
when you consume any kind of medication, your body starts to break it down into its component parts, some of which is what the medicine's for. So if you're taking an antibiotic, for example, your body's going to metabolize that and break it down, and the useful stuff goes into your system, and the stuff that's not useful ends up getting flushed out.
Okay, now when you get to the metabolites, how are you going to measure that? How are you going to measure that if I get stopped?
You have to do a blood test right now.
Okay.
So the way it would work now, depending on where you get stopped, some departments have what are called drug recognition experts. They've gone to special classes for training who look for certain signs in drivers to determine if they are under the influence. If they make that determination, the courts have said, okay, you've got probable cause, you can go and get a sample. Other departments will force you to go through field sobriety testing, the ones that count to backwards from the letter Z to the letter P, count every number between 66 and 77, stand on one leg, walk like a chicken, all those kinds of things. If you fail those tests, you've got probable cause to go to the hospital and get a blood draw, whether that's for alcohol or drugs.
What about the swabbing? I thought the swabbing was supposed to be the new standard.
They're trying to implement two different things. One is a swab. Another one is a breathalyzer that is able to detect the presence of active THC. That's not a nationally recognized standard for police departments yet. They're working towards that outcome. I think part of it is the technology is not where they would want it to be.
Yeah, I've got one question to ask you before the break. You get your 2 or 2.5 ounces?
2.5.
Okay, so you get 2.5 ounces a day. Has anybody done a study to determine how 2.5 ounces would affect you or me or Amy? We're all 3 different individuals, 3 different sizes, 3 different ages. Each one of us has a different way of metabolizing.
Yep.
Has anybody done a study to determine that? Because we know with alcohol, they really don't care. If you have 2 ounces, you have 2 ounces. Shows up in the breathalyzer test that you've been drinking.
Mm-hmm.
But with 2.5 ounces of ingestible marijuana, have they done a study to see how your body's going to react if you take it all at one time? Let's say you're chewing brownies or cookies, which will really make you higher than a kite. But I got to tell the truth on the air.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't do it because it would affect my blood pressure and it'd wreck me. But the point is, I know that people that I'm familiar with do it, and they've told me. Consequently, we don't know how it's going to affect us. So there are warnings on medication.
Sure.
Like if you're taking Norco, don't take 4 Norco at one time. There's a prescription.
Right.
Right.
But there's no prescription for 2.5 ounces, is there?
It's not that specific. There's a
Well, don't you
daily-
think that's dangerous?
Maybe and maybe not. There has been testing done, and much like alcohol, there's a whole lot of factors that go into how your body breaks it down: size, age, quite frankly, length of use. So if you're a long-time alcohol consumer, you're going to have a higher tolerance and have less impact from that substance than you would if you were a first-time user.
Okay.
Marijuana is very similar in terms of how it affects people and what it does. There are obviously side effects for any kind of medication or substance that you take, which differ from person to person. But before you take any kind of medication, if your doctor is going to prescribe it for you, you should ask them questions about what kind of side effects could I expect from taking this. And theoretically, your doctor should be able to tell you those things and give you some peace of mind.
Well, you can't go to the Merck manual for THC. You can't go to the Merck manual, which is the compendium for drugs, or Google it up and find out what's acceptable. We're going to take a break at this point. We'll be right back.
Are you in legal trouble? Are you in need of legal advice? Or just have general legal questions? Call 1-800-529-8721. That's 1-800-LAW-USA1. And watch Law Power Hour and get your questions answered by experienced attorneys who are experts in their field. That's Law Power Hour, hosted by Barry Keller, attorney at law. Saturdays at 10 a.m. here on WHPR Detroit Live.
Okay, we're back. It's Father's Day tomorrow, and I need to ask you a question. Do fathers have rights when they get divorced?
Absolutely.
How do you feel about that? You're a family law specialist. I mean, I know you do things besides family law.
Sure.
You know, you're a pioneer in the marijuana arena, both of you, and you're doing a good job, and you're representing your clients, and I respect you for it. But you also handle family law.
That's correct.
And grandparents, if you're out there and you're not calling me today with your questions and you want to know why grandparents don't have rights and you don't listen to the show or call in, you're not going to find out. I'm serious about this.
Yep.
Okay, what kind of father's rights are there? The mom and dad get divorced, and mom says, I'm going to be the custodial parent, and I'm also going to be the legal parent, legal in charge.
Mhm.
What about dad? What is he supposed to do? Just write checks, hide his head, and not see the kids?
What you're describing, Barry, is the absolute outlier situation that Dan and I at least see in our practice
Yeah.
and in the forum of the courts these days. Fathers' rights in Michigan has evolved, I would say, in the last 30 years quite drastically. And one of the challenges that we always have, particularly with our female clients who are the mothers of these children, is when they come in, they've been informed by Auntie, Miss So-and-so at church, and the lady down the street who's a grandparent of an adult child at this point. Hey, dads don't have rights. That has evolved in the state of Michigan, particularly over the last 3 decades. And the assumption going in for everyone who has a family law matter where there are children involved and the parents are going to have to make the decision as to what's in the best interest of that child, which is the key component to determining both legal custody and physical custody. The everyday approach, ideally, that the courts want to see, that psychologists want to see, that is very encouraged, is joint legal, joint physical custody of that child.
Sharing.
And it doesn't have to necessarily be a 50-50, a 55-45, a 65-35. That's when the individual factors regarding the family, work schedules, religious practices, the ability to support the child and to maintain that child's life before the parents split to where the parents are after they've split, the child's grades and educational decisions, medical decisions. There are a whole conglomerate of factors that go in. The basis that we always operate under is a joint legal, joint physical. If there are outlying factors, you have a parent who is drug addicted, you have a parent who has battled alcohol for 20 years, and it's a well-known fact amongst the child's village, if you will, that's helping to raise that child. If the parent's job takes them out of Michigan, then you're going to be looking at more of a one-sided custody situation where the child's residence is going to stay in Michigan with the parent who's staying here. The child's residence is going to stay with the parent who has unfortunately or who has fortunately not had the battle with alcohol or drugs. Those are easy cases to call.
Okay, here's the big question of the day. Once the divorce proceedings start and there are children involved,
Mhm.
are those children under the jurisdiction of the court?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you please explain to our listeners that although mom and dad may think that they've got physical custody and legal custody, that the court ultimately has more control as to where that child goes and how that child spends his or her days and nights than anyone else.
So it's a real simple sort of formula. Once you enter the family court system and you have children, the court ultimately becomes the final decider. They are essentially the ultimate parent, quote unquote. The more the two parents can get along and make decisions for the kids, the less the court has to be involved. They do that to encourage people to get along and not argue. Because if too many people are fighting and there's too many motions, the whole system gets backed up. They have a whole lot of ways to encourage people to do that. The bottom line is, if you get along and you can make decisions and co-parent, that's the big catchphrase these days. If you can co-parent, the court will stay out of your business. If you can't make decisions about anything and you have to keep going back to court, the court's going to make those decisions. And as a general rule, nobody will like the outcome that the court grants, because the court never does really what one side wants in total or what the other side wants in total. Another thing to be cautious about, as a general practice, as Amy said, unless you're physically abusive to your children and it's documented, you're a drug addict who's living on the street and who's abandoned your family, joint legal custody it's not legally presumed, but every single court that I have been in, they give joint legal custody to parents.
Okay,
Both parents should have decision-making authority for major decisions.
Well, there are a number of factors that the courts look at.
Correct.
For example, if there's domestic violence
That
Yes.
is one factor.
and the child is present during the domestic violence,
Or not.
well, it can be a significant factor either way
Mhm.
as it relates to who gets physical custody.
But it's only one of the factors. And what the courts have been very specific about is, if you only have one factor weighing in a certain direction, that can be dispositive, but the court has to consider all of the factors together. And so if you have an incident of domestic violence 8 or 10 years ago, there haven't been any problems since then, and all other factors are equal, I would say that most courts, maybe not all, but most courts would grant joint legal and joint physical custody. Now, if your incident of domestic violence was a week and a half before the case was filed, and the victim of the domestic violence, whether it's mom or dad, ends up in the hospital, the court's going to look at that as a more significant factor.
What about visitation? You and I get divorced.
Yes.
You live in Detroit, and I move to Saginaw, and I want to see the kids. We're going to meet in Clarkston. You're going to drop the kids off every other weekend in Clarkston for me. How are we going to handle this?
Well, the first problem, if you've moved to Saginaw, you may have moved more than 100 miles away from where the kids were domiciled. So if you do that, your first problem is the court has to give you permission to move that far away. Otherwise, you're jeopardizing your right to visitation. There's a specific statute in Michigan that is in every divorce judgment or every custody judgment that neither party can move the domicile of the child more than 100 miles away.
Well, suppose we haven't moved the domicile away.
Now that's another issue.
Amy's staying in Wayne County, and I moved to Saginaw. Is the court going to order us to meet in Clarkston every other weekend?
That's a possibility. We always advise clients that it is best to mediate amongst themselves, if that's possible, an agreement that everyone can live with. In the court system,
Well, wait a second now. If they mediate an agreement that everybody can live with, then why are they getting divorced?
because their focus is on their children. Because just because you can't live with someone, because you can't stand them anymore, the relationship has gone south, for whatever reason you have irreconcilable differences, they can put those aside and focus on their children. and their children's best interest.
Now, you know most people can't do that.
I
Come
do
on,
know
come
that.
on, come on now.
That's the ideal client,
But
but
that's-
you're absolutely right.
98% of the time, if they're bickering, they're going to bicker over everything and anything that they can bicker about, whether it's that giant moth on the wall or who gave them the tablecloth
Right.
that they got at their shower before their wedding as a gift.
Yes.
And if they've got two kids, Freddie and Susie, they're going to argue over Freddie and Susie and who spends time with them. So
Absolutely.
let's get into the real world, the practical world, because we've got grandparents out here, and Grandpa wants to see his grandson tomorrow, and he says, why can't I see my grandson because my daughter-in-law doesn't like me?
Yep.
The
We haven't
courts-
got there yet.
No. The courts have a branch called Friend of the Court in the family division. And Friend of the Court, and we always advise clients that Friend of the Court is an avenue that you can take if there is a dispute without necessarily having to get attorneys involved in the circuit court level and a judge to be the ultimate determining factor. You can go to Friend of the Court, and it's a much more laid back atmosphere. Friend of the Court has maps for people. As you were saying, where are we going to meet between Wayne County and Saginaw? Well, the Friend of the Court parenting time, what they come up with as a formula is going to tell us who picks the child up for their parenting time to commence, who drives to get the child at the end of their parenting time, if that's the case, or the parties can agree, but they have a systematic way of saying, this is ideally what you should do to cut down on the animosity, to cut down on the conflict, and to cut down on the arguing.
I'll be right back. We're going to take a break for a minute. And I'm the grandpa who wants to know, why can't I see my grandson tomorrow because my daughter-in-law and son got divorced?
Are you in legal trouble? Are you in need of legal advice? Or just have general legal questions? Call 1-800-529-8721. That's 1-800-LAW-USA1. And watch Law Power Hour and get your questions answered by experienced attorneys who are experts in their field. That's Law Power Hour, hosted by Barry Keller, attorney at law. Saturdays at 10 a.m. here on WHPR Detroit Live.
You know, before you answer my question, why don't you tell folks how they can reach the two of you?
You wanna take that one?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we have a website, fowlerandwilliams.com. But more importantly, we have cell phones. We don't have office phones because we make ourselves available 24/7 to clients and potential clients. So our cell numbers are quite easy to remember once you've got the first 6 digits. It's 313-421 for both of us. My last four digits are 6069. Dan's is 8083. So in order to reach me, you dial 313-421-6069. For Dan, 313-421-8083.
And for those of you who are listening, I hope you're getting great information because you're not calling in today, which I respect you for not calling in if you just woke up. I'm surprised because we had a thunderstorm, woke me up kind of early this morning.
Got me up
Oh.
too.
Well,
Yes.
let's get back to this big question. I'm a grandpa. Tomorrow is Father's Day.
Correct?
My daughter-in-law and son are divorced. It's her turn to have the kids. And she says, well, your dad can't see the kids tomorrow because I'm going to see my dad. So Grandpa loses out. Does Grandpa have any rights?
That's a very complicated question, both in the state of Michigan and from the U.S. Supreme Court's purview. And I say that because it depends on what the parents have agreed to. Typically in Michigan, and every court, I would venture to say in the United States, looks at Mother's Day and Father's Day as sacred holidays, as they should. It's part of the parent-child bond. Here in Michigan, Father's Day presumptively is with Dad. And under the friend of the court calendar, most often what we'll see is Dad has parenting time from Friday evening at 6 p.m. or it could be 3 p.m. if the children are still in school after school ends, up and until Sunday evening at 6 p.m. Or maybe the parties have agreed that Dad gets to spend overnight with the child that weekend. So there's an exchange on Monday morning. If you don't have that level of rules that are being followed, that level of understanding and compassion from mom's perspective, the problem is we see in families it becomes a ticky-tack kind of back and forth with a tennis match of, well, you didn't give me this time, so I'm not granting you the time that you want. And it becomes, the child becomes more property that can be used against the other parent and the other parent's family, more importantly.
Good morning.
Yes, can I have the number again? She was on a little bit fast.
Yes, ma'am. It's 313-421-6069 or 313-421-8083.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so it becomes this tennis match, and that's where the real problems begin. Dad,
That's when cases get ratcheted up.
yes.
We call them high conflict divorce or custody cases because everything is a battle. You've got to be very clear when you enter judgments who's going to get what time.
Correct.
That helps Dad's father know every year on Father's Day I'm going to get to see my grandkid.
Because my son has my child.
The
that
situation
child.
you're describing
I
is
deliberately described that
a
situation.
high conflict case.
Yes.
So do you have rights to see your grandchild on Father's Day as a grandparent? The answer is no. It's flat out
So
no.
grandparents have no rights.
They have very limited rights. So the U.S. Supreme Court, in two decisions that Amy referenced, one in the late 80s and one in the early 2000s, determined that step-parents and grandparents have limited rights because there is a presumption that biological parents should have their children and that biological parents are fit. In other words, they're an appropriate person to care for a child. Sometimes that's not true, but we can't presume that.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yes, I just called. I didn't know you guys. I didn't know that you guys were going to talk about grandparents' limited rights. Where is that in ACL about grandparents have limited rights?
You want to know what grandparents' rights
When
are?
we talk to attorneys, they will say that some attorneys say that grandparents don't have no rights at all.
Well, that's why we're talking about it, because they have very limited rights, and you're going to hear the rest of the story right now, okay?
So the courts have provided very limited avenues by which grandparents can have time. First, you have to have either a divorce that's in process, or a final divorce judgment, or a custody case in process, some legal dispute. If a grandparent is denied all access to a child, to a grandchild, they can petition the court for grandparenting time. In order to get it, there's a two-part process. And I'm going to let Amy kind of go over what
Okay.
that looks like.
Well, we got about 5 minutes, Amy, so give it.
Go ahead, Daniel. You're on a roll.
It's you have to show first that the parent isn't fit. And there is a presumption in courts that parents are fit. So you have to overcome that mindset of the court that every parent is a fit parent. Assuming you can do that by showing the parent's abusive and has injured the child, or the parent is an alcoholic and that's impacting their ability to make good decisions, then you still have to get over the hurdle of showing that it's in the child's best interest to have a set grandparent visitation schedule, which means the court has to run through all of those factors and determine whether or not you should get time. It's not impossible, but it is very difficult to be able to do that.
But what do you do in a situation where the parents fit and the grandparents fit and the grandparent is being denied the opportunity to spend time with the grandchild?
It's unfortunate, but if the parents are fit, even if that means that they're denying the grandparent time, you can appeal to the court, but most often the court's going to say the parents have a right to do that. And if both of the children are saying, no, grandpa and grandma can't have time with them, the court's going to inquire why it is that both parents think this is a bad idea.
Well, suppose I say, I want my dad to have time with our children. He's a good guy. Amy says, he's a good guy. But there's no provision in the law for it, so it's got to be up to the parties to consent to it, is what you're trying to say.
Correct.
Now, if your son has your kid and he wants to let the kid stay with you during his parenting time, that's okay.
And that is, in fact, encouraged. Most of the judges that we practice under do say it's in the best interest of the child to have that time with grandma and grandpa.
Good morning.
I have a question. My son and his wife are divorced. He doesn't have anything to do with the children because the relationship is really estranged. But I spend time with my grandkids. How can I go up? Do I have to go to court to actually spend some time with them?
Well, the first thing I would say is, without knowing all the facts of the case, I can't give any specific advice. But generally speaking, there's no reason you couldn't reach out and ask for parenting time. One of the issues is you've got to be able to show that the parents are denying you access to your grandchildren. That's one of the first things they're going to look for. If they deny you all access to your grandchildren, then you would probably want to consult with an attorney about what your options might be so they can look at the specific facts of that case.
Well, here's what's wrong with the law. Parents can't get along. They run into difficulties. Dad ends up in jail. Mom has a problem. Ultimately, one of the grandparents can end up the guardian.
Correct.
Yes.
So that's what's wrong with the law. Why do we have to wait until there's a calamity? Why do we have to wait until there's some difficulty in the family? Why do we have to wait until there's an adverse situation for the grandparents to have the privilege, which they have a right to, and a guardianship?
Correct.
Why do we have to wait that long for it to occur? Doesn't that make you wonder that there's something wrong with the law?
Barry, if Dan and I on a daily basis could change the law and change all of the factors that we think would make lives of the children involved in the cases that we litigate in family law better, it would be an endless amount of changes. Because the law presumes that parents are naturally fit, You have to overcome that presumption in order to get the court to lend you its ear to say, okay, dad's in jail or prison. Mom is unfit for whatever reason. She's out on the streets. She has become an addict. CPS has validated and verified cases of neglect against her, and they have interceded. They've tried to help her with both rehabilitation services, parenting classes, and community networks that she could use in order to help her facilitate a better motherly relationship with her children. All that has failed, and we are now throwing our hands up, and yes, you end up in probate court asking for a guardianship.
Okay.
And even then, the judges are reluctant to dismiss the one parent, even with their problems. Maybe it's drugs, maybe it's finances, maybe it's mental health issues. Even then, they are very weary of signing that child over to a guardian,
Okay.
being the grandparent.
On that note, I wish everybody a happy Father's Day and hope you get to go where you want to go. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
Of course. Thank you,
Thank
Barry.
you, Mr.
Okay.
Keller.
We'll see you again.